Saving money is supposed to be simple. Spend less than you earn. Put the extra aside. Repeat. That's the advice we've all heard over and over so often that questioning it feels almost embarrassing. If saving money feels hard, the assumption is obvious. You're doing something wrong. You lack discipline. You don't want it badly enough. You're careless, impulsive, or financially irresponsible. But here's the mystery. If saving money is so simple, why does it feel so difficult for so many people? Why do millions of intelligent, hardworking adults, people who manage jobs, families, and entire lives struggle to build even a small emergency fund? Why does one unexpected expense, a car repair, a medical bill, a few weeks without income push so many people to the edge? And why does it feel like no matter how hard you try, the finish line keeps moving? Because here's the uncomfortable truth we rarely say out loud. If saving money were only about discipline, then decades of advice should have worked by now. But it hasn't. Instead, saving money feels harder than ever, not just emotionally, but structurally. And the real reasons have less to do with your character, and more to do with systems that quietly reshaped how money works, how life is priced, and how risk is transferred, often without our consent. This video is not about budgeting tips. It's about a story that begins long before you were born. A story shaped by financial systems, economic shifts, cultural expectations, and invisible incentives. A story with origins, a rise, a breaking point, and a series of solutions that failed. And by the end, the question won't be, why am I bad at saving? It will be, why was saving designed to feel this hard? Setting the stage, the world where saving made sense. To understand why saving money feels hard today, we need to visit a time when it didn't. A time when saving wasn't just possible. It was expected, not because people were more disciplined, but because the world was structured differently. The old financial contract for much of the 20th century, especially after World War II, saving money was woven into daily life. Not as a challenge, but as a default. Here's why. Most people lived under what economists later called the post-war financial contract. It wasn't written down. No one voted on it. But it shaped everything. The contract looked like this. Jobs paid wages that rose with productivity. Housing costs stayed relatively stable. Healthcare and education were partially or fully subsidized. Pensions promised future security. Debt existed, but was limited and stigmatized. Emergencies were rare enough to absorb in this world. Saving money wasn't heroic. It was normal. If you earned a steady paycheck, you could reasonably expect that. Rent wouldn't suddenly double. A single illness wouldn't bankrupt you. Your job wouldn't vanish overnight. Retirement wouldn't depend entirely on personal investing skill. Saving felt boring. And boring is exactly what saving should feel like. Why this matters: when saving is boring, it means the system is doing most of the work. When saving feels stressful, it means the system is pushing risk onto individuals. That shift, quiet, gradual, and rarely explained, is where our story begins. Origins: how saving became a personal moral test. The first major change wasn't psychological. It was structural. The separation of risk in the mid-20th century, risk was shared. Employers carried job stability risk. Governments carried healthcare and retirement risk. Communities absorbed economic shocks. But starting in the 1970s and accelerating through the 1980s, something changed. Risk began moving slowly but relentlessly onto individuals. This wasn't announced as a crisis. It was marketed as freedom. From pensions to personal responsibility, one of the most important shifts was the decline of defined benefit pensions. Under pensions, employers guaranteed retirement income. Workers didn't need investing expertise. Longevity risk was pooled, but pensions were expensive. So companies replaced them with defined contribution plans, 401(k)s, and personal retirement accounts. The message sounded empowering. You're in control of your future. But control came with responsibility, and responsibility came with risk. Suddenly, saving money wasn't just about emergencies. It was about market timing, asset allocation, inflation, risk, longevity risk. Behavioral discipline saving became a high-stakes skill without formal training. The moral shift at the same time, the cultural narrative changed. Struggling financially was no longer framed as a systemic issue. It became a personal failure. If you didn't save, you were irresponsible, you lacked willpower, you made bad choices. This moral framing mattered. Because once a problem is labeled personal, systems stop feeling responsible for fixing it. The rise, how life got more expensive without feeling richer. Here's the paradox that confuses so many people. You may be earning more than previous generations, yet feel poorer. This isn't an illusion, it's math. The cost shift you weren't told about.
While wages did rise nominally, essential costs rose faster, especially in four areas. Pertama, housing; kedua, healthcare; ketiga, education; keempat, childcare. These aren't luxuries, they're prerequisites for modern life. And unlike discretionary spending, you can't budget your way out of them. Housing, the silent drain. Housing used to cost around 20–25 of income. Today, for many people, it's 30–50. That difference doesn't just reduce savings, it removes slack. Slack is the space where savings live. When there's no more slack, every expense becomes urgent. Healthcare, the emergency that never ends. Healthcare costs didn't just rise, they became unpredictable. You can plan for rent, you can plan for groceries, you cannot easily plan for a sudden diagnosis and uncovered procedure. A deductible reset. Savings are supposed to handle emergencies, but when emergencies are a routine, savings are constantly under attack. Education and the front-loaded life education costs moved earlier in life. That replaced public investment. Instead of starting adulthood with savings, people started with obligations. That matters, because early savings compound. Early debt compounds to just in the opposite direction. The breaking point when savings stopped feeling possible. Eventually, the system reached a breaking point. Not with a single collapse but with millions of quiet failures. The emergency fund myth. You've probably heard this advice. Everyone should have 3–6 months of expenses saved. It sounds reasonable until you do the math. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, the target isn't motivational, it's alienating. It implies safety exists but only for people who already have it. When advice feels unreachable, people stop listening, not because they don't care, but because hope is a limited resource. Debt as a substitute for savings. As saving became harder, debt stepped in. Credit cards, buy now pay later, personal loans. Debt became the emergency fund, but debt doesn't absorb shock, it amplifies it. Interest ensures that every crisis echoes into the future.
Fallout, the psychology of financial fatigue. This is where the story turns psychological. Because constant financial pressure changes how the brain works. Scarcity and decision fatigue. When money is tight, every decision carries weight. That creates cognitive load. Research shows that scarcity reduces long-term planning, self-control, risk tolerance. Not because people are weak, but because bandwidth is limited. Saving requires thinking about the future. Scarcity traps attention in the present. Why willpower isn't enough. Willpower is not a renewable resource. When life requires constant financial vigilance, saving feels like swimming upstream. Eventually exhaustion wins. Not laziness. Exhaustion. Failed fixes. Why advice didn't work. For decades, the response to saving struggles has been the same. Budget better, cut expenses, skip lattes, hustle more. But these fixes assume the problem is behavior, not structure. The advice gap. Most advice works best for people who already have slack. It fails the people who need it most. That's why saving advice feels insulting to some and irrelevant to others. It treats symptoms while ignoring causes. Modern parallels. The pattern repeats. Today, the same dynamics are playing out again. Inflation reduces purchasing power. Housing costs outpace wages. Risk shifts further onto individuals. Safety nets shrink. The pattern repeats. And each time, saving feels harder, not because people changed, but because the rules did. The reveal, the answer to the mystery. So why does saving money feel hard? Because saving was never meant to carry this much weight alone. It was meant to sit on top of stability, not replace it. When stability erodes, saving becomes a survival skill instead of a habit, and survival is exhausting. 3 takeaways. Takeaway number 1. Difficulty is not failure. If saving feels hard, it's not proof you're broken. It's evidence the system is strained. Takeaway number 2. Slack matters more than disciplined. Savings grow where there's margin. Margin is structural, not moral. Takeaway number 3. Awareness changes strategy. Understanding the system doesn't solve everything, but it changes how you play the game. The warning and call to action. Here's the warning. If we keep framing saving as a personal flaw, we'll never fix the conditions that make it difficult. And here's the open-ended thought. What would a world look like where saving felt boring again? Not heroic, not rare, just normal. If this video helped reframe how you think about money, consider liking it. It tells the algorithm this conversation matters. Subscribe if you want more deep, system-level explanations of everyday struggles we're told are personal. And leave a comment. When did saving money start feeling hard for you? Because your story isn't just yours. It's part of a much bigger one.